Do you feel more comfortable around men than women? Like female friendships are just harder in a way that you can't quite explain. So, say you're in a room full of women, maybe it's a party, a work event, some kind of gathering, and there's this tension you can't name. You're scanning, wondering if they're judging you, comparing yourself without meaning to, feeling like you're slightly outside of something everyone else is naturally a part of. But with men, it's easier. Conversations feel more straightforward. You don't feel like you have to manage as much. So you tell yourself, I'm just not a girl's girl. I've always gotten along better with guys. Women are complicated. But what if the problem isn't actually other women? What if the discomfort you feel around women is telling you something about your relationship with yourself? Because here's what's actually happening. The tension you feel with other women is a mirror of the tension you feel with your own femininity. And to understand why, we have to go back to the beginning, to your mother or whoever your primary female caregiver was. She was your first template, your first mirror for what being a woman looks like, what feminine energy feels like, whether closeness with women is safe. And if the relationship didn't feel safe, if it felt critical, inconsistent, dismissive, competitive, your nervous system learnt something. Closeness with women is unsafe. Being vulnerable or expressive around women leads to rejection or judgment. And it's not always about neglect or a lack of love. Sometimes it's just about a lack of attunement. Your mother might have been loving and present, but if she couldn't mirror your emotions back with empathy, if she couldn't make your internal world feel valid, if your individuality or emotional expression felt too much for her, you learned something about feminine closeness. You learned it wasn't safe to be fully yourself. And when you internalized that early experience, you took on two messages. One, this is what other women are like. And two, this is what other women will think of me. So now when you're around other women, you're not just reacting to them, you're re experiencing how it felt to be around her. So when your individuality or emotions were too much for your mother or weren't mirrored, weren't celebrated, weren't met safely, you learn to suppress certain parts of yourself, your sensitivity, your emotional expression, your aliveness, your expressiveness, your comfort being seen, your sense of wanting things, your ability to enjoy your body, your intuition, your needs, your softness. And as a child, they showed up as things like exuberance, pure joy that made you spin or dance or laugh too loud, as big feelings, as gut knowing, sensing things about people or situations you couldn't explain, as being loud and expressive when you were happy, as wanting things openly, as needing comfort and touch and reassurance, as using your whole body to communicate. And when those things weren't welcomed, when your big feelings were met with irritation instead of attunement, when your expressiveness was seen as attention seeking, when your intuition was dismissed as irrational, when your needs were treated as inconvenient, you learnt to suppress them. When those things weren't safe, when they were treated as inherently problematic, when your too much became a constant reframe, when your aliveness was seen as disruption, when needing things made you a burden, you learnt to contain it. And then those early suppressions don't just stay in childhood, they shape your entire relationship with your feminine nature. The aliveness you learn to tone down in adulthood becomes disconnection from your body, from enjoying sensation, from pleasure, from sensuality. You learn to be in your head instead of in your body, and now being embodied feels foreign. The comfort being seen that you learn to minimize becomes discomfort with being desired, with owning that magnetism. You learn to make yourself less visible, and now being wanted or seen feels uncomfortable instead of natural. Your intuition, the gut knowing that you learn to doubt, becomes a constant need for logical proof before you can trust yourself. You learn that feelings don't count unless you can rationalize them And now you second guess every instinct. The natural rhythms you learn to override become forcing constant productivity. You learnt that your energy needs to be steady and predictable. So now you push through exhaustion instead of honoring when you need actual rest. The softness that you learn to harden becomes seen as weakness in yourself and in others. You learn that being soft can mean being vulnerable to being hurt. So you armor up. And the receptivity you learn to refuse becomes inability to receive anything, compliments, help, love, without immediately deflecting or reciprocating. You might have learned that needing or receiving makes you a burden, so now you don't let anything in. So you learned to value what felt safer: independence, logic, being low maintenance, self-sufficiency, masculine energy, because these things don't require vulnerability. They don't require you to be seen. They don't require emotional attunement or cyclical honoring or trusting what you can't explain. They're controllable, measurable, safe. But here's what that created. When you can only show up as independent and logical, when you're using those traits as armor against being emotionally vulnerable, you cut yourself off from depth. Now, there's nothing wrong with logic or independence, but because genuine intimacy requires emotional availability, it requires co-regulation. My nervous system settling because yours does. I feel safe because you're letting me be felt. And you can't co-regulate from behind armor. People can admire your strength, respect your competence, enjoy your company, but they can't actually feel you because you're managing yourself instead of being present. With women especially, this creates a problem because women tend to bond through emotional resonance, through mirroring, through shared vulnerability, through that me too, I feel that recognition. That's the language of feminine connection. When you're armored up in independence and logic, you're essentially speaking a different language. The space between you and other women stays polite, functional, maybe still enjoyable, but not intimate. So when you're around women who aren't armoring up like that, who are emotionally expressive, vulnerable, it triggers something in you. Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're doing what you can't let yourself do. They're being what you learned wasn't safe to be. And then what's happening is that because you've suppressed those feminine parts of yourself, seeing them in other women is triggering. It stirs something in you. And it's not jealousy or judgment. You're seeing in them the parts of yourself that were never safe to be, the parts you minimized, hid, suppressed, and exiled from yourself. So you feel tension, comparison, distance, an urge to pull away or criticize or separate yourself from women like that. But it's not really about them. It's that you're seeing your own rejected parts in them. And then culture adds another layer. Society teaches women to compete for beauty, for desirability, for success, for attention. You know, girl groups can feel cliquey, performative. They can be full of drama. So if your nervous system already doesn't feel safe around feminine energy, culture gives you even more reasons to pull back. Even when you encounter women who aren't like that, who are genuinely open and warm, you still will feel that tension because the issue isn't about necessarily finding the right women. You've lost access to the parts of yourself that would allow you to connect with them. So the wound isn't, I don't like women. The wound is, I don't know how to feel at ease in the feminine, in others, or in myself. It's a belonging wound, specifically a wound around belonging within the feminine. So in order to change this, the goal isn't to become more feminine, like there's something wrong with you. It's not about wearing pretty dresses or having some super girly routine or adopting some feminine identity. It's about shifting from an energetic orientation of constantly doing, managing, and controlling to one that includes presence, feeling, and receiving. You're not replacing masculine energy, but integrating what you've cut off. Because right now, you're operating from output energy constantly, doing, producing, organizing, solving, and you've lost access to input energy, feeling, sensing, receiving, integrating. And somewhere along the way, you learn that this kind of responsiveness leaves you vulnerable to getting hurt. So you rejected it entirely. And now reconnecting with it feels unnatural, unsafe, even. So, this is where the healing has to begin. So, what does this shift look like in practice? First of all, it's slowing down intentionally, giving yourself permission to move, think, and even speak slower, because feminine energy exists in space, not in urgency. When you rush through everything, you're not leaving room for anything to actually land in your body. You're staying up in your head where it's safe and controllable. So try this before you respond in a conversation. Take a breath. Before you get out of bed, lie there for 30 seconds. Walk to get a coffee without checking your phone. These aren't productivity hacks. These are your nervous system resets, okay? And then you can drop into your body, because feminine energy lives below the neck, right? It's not in your thoughts. So spend time doing things that anchor you there. Dance in your kitchen, stretch without a goal, walk to just feel your body move through space, not as exercise, not as productivity, just as a way of remembering that you have a body that feels things. Also, feeling before you fix things. When something happens, when you get difficult news, when someone says something that stings, instead of immediately jumping to, what do I think about this, or how do I fix this? I want you to pause and ask yourself, what do I feel right now? Let the feeling be there without rushing to analyze it away, because you've been using analysis as a way to avoid feeling, and feeling is where connection lives. Also, practice receiving. When someone offers help, notice that impulse to say, no, I've got it, it's fine, really, or to immediately offer something back so that you're not in their debt. And instead of following that impulse, just say, thank you. Let them give to you. Let yourself take up space as someone who has needs, and let them be met. And then also create without purpose. Paint badly, write with no point, decorate a corner of your room just because it feels good. Move your body with no choreography, expression without needing it to mean something or go somewhere, because this is how you remember that your value isn't tied to your output. And here's what shifts when you start to practice this. When you stop treating your own feminine energy as dangerous, when you stop armoring up against your softness, your needs, your own cyclical nature, other women stop triggering you, because you're no longer seeing your rejected self in them. Their emotional expressiveness doesn't threaten you anymore, because you're not suppressing your own. Their vulnerability doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, because you're learning to be vulnerable too. Their needs don't feel like weakness, because you're allowing yourself to have needs. And then connection with women becomes what it was always supposed to be, not something you have to brace for, not a performance where you're constantly monitoring yourself, just connection. You stop walking into rooms full of women with your guard up. You stop needing to prove you're different from them or better than them or not like other girls, because that tension just isn't there anymore. But that's not even the biggest shift. The biggest shift is what happens everywhere else. When you stop forcing productivity and start honoring your natural rhythms, you stop burning out every 3 months. You stop measuring your worth by your output. You start working with your energy instead of against it. And somehow you get more done with less exhaustion and better results. When you stop rejecting your needs and start letting people support you, you stop building one-sided relationships where you give everything and receive nothing. You stop being the person everyone leans on but nobody actually knows. You start experiencing what it's like to be loved for who you are, not just for what you provide. You know, when you stop treating your emotional depth like a problem to manage, you stop having surface level everything. Your creativity deepens, your relationships become real, your life starts to feel like yours instead of a performance you're exhausted from maintaining. Reconnecting with the feminine isn't just about feeling comfortable around women. It's about reclaiming your full range as a human. And when you do that and you finally stop exiling half of yourself, everything shifts, not just with women, but everything in life. So start small, pick one practice from this video, just one, and try it today. Not to fix yourself, not to become someone new, but just to remember who you've been underneath all that armor. She's still there and she's still waiting for you.